Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the board games launching on Kickstarter and GameFound over the next week. If you're new to the channel, we do this every week going over all the upcoming campaigns, so if you want to stay up to date, this is definitely the place to be. But before I get started, I do like to go over some new announcements that I just found out about over the past week, and I do have a couple zombie related ones for you. And the first update is that a new release of Zombicide has just been announced, and this is called Zombicide White Death, and this is going to be a standalone expansion to the game Zombicide Black Plague. So if you are a fan of the medieval theme, this is definitely something you'll want to keep an eye on. It is supposed to be a little bit harder than some of the other ones, but it also has a little bit more rules overhead. But it's also the one that has the Kickstarter exclusive miniature for Ash from Evil Dead, so that alone probably makes it the coolest Zombicide release so far. There's no release date for this one just yet, but usually when CMON announces something, it launches within about 2 months. And the next announcement isn't a board game, but I thought I'd also mention it since it also falls into a zombie universe, and it is an established IP that I know a lot of people are a fan of, and that's the Walking Dead universe role-playing game. And this is available to follow on Kickstarter now with its pre-launch page. I don't think they have a date announced for this one just yet either, but if you are interested in this one, of course you can always go ahead and click to get notified. And just before we jump into the games launching this week, I do always like to give a quick shout out to Alex over at Board Game Co, because him and I do work together tracking these games independently, but then we sync up periodically so that when we are putting together these lists, whether they're weekly updates or monthly updates, we're giving you the most up-to-date info as possible. And I do these videos every single week, going into as much detail as I can for each of the games launching during that week, but then Alex does one at the start of each month, going over the entire month at a little bit more high level, but giving you a good idea of what's to come a little bit further into the future. But Alex does do this full time, and he puts out at least a video every single day covering these campaigns in more detail as they're launching, and he also gets a chance to play them and put out reviews and playthroughs. So if you're interested to know more about all the games that we're talking about here today, definitely follow along with him because he'll have a lot more info to come. And as always, you can go ahead and find a link to his channel in the description below. But for now, let's check out the Kickstarters. And starting off the week on March 13th, we have Falconry, and this plays 2 to 4 players. It takes about 5 to 15 minutes to play, and this is a easy to learn and easy to teach abstract strategy game where players will be using tile placement, trying to be the first to get 6 of their own colored tiles in a row. And the way that this works is that players are going to be alternating back and forth placing their tiles, but then some of these tiles will also have some special effects and abilities that will allow you to manipulate the tiles that are already placed out onto the table, and players are going to be trying to take advantage of these different abilities in order to position themselves so that on one of their following turns they'll be able to connect 6 of their tiles together. There's not a whole lot of info out yet at the time of me filming this video, so I don't know exactly what kind of abilities you'll have in order to manipulate the tiles out on the table, but if you are interested in this one and if you're a fan of abstract strategy games, you'll be able to check this one out in the description below, and of course you can follow along to get notified once it launches. And launching on March 14th, we have Kingdoms of Akandia, the Seven Realms. And this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 90 to 120 minutes to play. And this is a cooperative adventure game where players are going to be trying to move around on the board, collecting different materials and then converting those into other materials that you can then use to manufacture different weapons and upgrades that you'll use to attack different monsters and creatures and try to complete different objectives over 3 chapters. And this one was actually a game I covered quite a few months back, but they ended up pulling this one down to work on the presentation and how they were running the campaign at the time and trying to improve things so that things were a little bit clearer to the backers, but then also improve on some of the gameplay as well. So they've been taking a lot of feedback here, which is always a nice thing to see, and they took the time to rejig whatever they needed to so that they're able to release the game now. So if this is a campaign that you're interested in last time it launched, this is your chance to jump back in. Or if you're just hearing about this one right now, like I said, I did already cover this one in detail, so I'll just go ahead and roll that footage for you now, and hopefully that helps you decide if this is a game that you're interested in. But the game plays over a series of chapters and sub-chapters that will progress as certain events or objectives are achieved, and players will be working cooperatively to follow the narrative and win or lose the game together. And each player is going to be playing as their own unique asymmetrical character, and they're going to have different skills, different magic or melee classes, and different abilities and strengths and immunities that are upgradable as the game goes on. Players also will be starting in their own unique location on the board with their own castle, and each character also comes with its own unique goal that can get character-specific upgrades for that character. Although players start separately, it's not too difficult to find each other on the board and then work together, and there are benefits to that because if you get into battle, you can help to attack and defend together, and that does give you an edge, but you might want to separate depending on your own unique goals because there might be something over there that you want to help you reach your specific goal and help you level up, whereas some of your teammates might want to go at another location that might benefit them. And the game's played over a very detailed board that's going to outline the entire world. And this board is broken into a sort of grid with labels on each of the grids so you can identify them. And this is important at different points in the game because different objectives or enemy cards might specify where different items or enemies spawn on the board. And the way this game works is that depending on the chapter that players are playing, there might be some specific rules or setup requirements, and then there's going to be a few sub-chapters to each of those chapters. And those might also come with some small tweaks to the rules. And the game's going to be played over a series of rounds where each player is going to have a number of action points that they can use in order to move around the board, visit different locations, and gain resources. Players all have their own actions, but they can spend them in any order amongst each other. After the players have performed all their actions, the enemies will get a turn where you're going to roll dice for each of the enemies, and that's going to dictate which direction they move. And if enemies end up moving together, they form a horde, which means that they just stay together for the rest of the game until they're defeated. But enemies can also do things like block resources, or if they move onto one of the players' castles, they're going to siege that castle, and players are going to have to go back there to try and protect it. Or they could also move into one of the character's current locations, which would trigger a battle with that character. Combat in this game is done through dice rolling, and the attacking character is going to be the player to go first, but then the defending player will be able to defend themselves through the use of dice and their abilities, and then it's going to alternate back and forth until one side or the other is defeated, and that would trigger the end of the battle. And of course, players can also upgrade their weapons and armor and skills, and also create potions to help give them an edge in battle. And if the players are able to complete the chapter's objectives while also defeating any of the enemies that come into their way, then they will have won that chapter and can move on to the following one. And the game continues like this, with new rules and mechanisms being added periodically as players complete the campaign, and a single campaign can take anywhere from 35 to 65 hours to complete. Also launching on the 14th, we have Drums of War Enclave, and this plays 1 to 2 players. It takes about 30 to 45 minutes to play, and this is a head-to-head card battler where one player is going to be playing as the humans, and then one player is going to be playing as the non-humans. And each player is going to have their own deck of cards, but there are a couple types of cards that you can find in the deck. There are the hero cards as well as the item cards, and the hero cards are going to have each character's health points, attack and defense values, the distance that they can attack, as well as their cost. And the interesting thing in this game is that the way that the cost works in order to play these cards is that you're going to be discarding cards from either your hand or from your deck. And on the surface, this might not sound that punishing, but you also need to know that any of the cards that you discard this way go into a separate pile from the cards that you lose in combat. And when your main deck runs out of cards and you need to reshuffle your discard pile, you're actually only going to get one of those discard piles back, so some of these cards are going to be permanently removed from the game. And as I said, these aren't all hero cards. Some of these are item cards as well, and you'll be using these to upgrade any of the hero cards that you currently have in play. These could have special abilities or upgrade certain stats, and they might have different effects depending on which character you attach them to, because each of the characters does also have a type of character that they are classed as, and these different classes come into play with the different abilities that might be available for them, or the type of other enemies that they're able to attack. Players are always going to start their turn with a hand of 5 cards, and they're going to be taking turns playing one card from their hand and then playing it onto the main board. There's 5 different lanes on the main board, and one thing to be aware of is each of these cards can have a number of swords at the top left corner of the card. This means that if the card only has 1 sword, then it can only attack the card directly across from it. But if, say, it had 3 swords, then it could attack across from it, but then it can also attack one to the left or one to the right. And this is just going to give you a little bit more versatility when it comes to the combat phase. And the combat phase begins once both players are no longer able to play any of their cards, or they just choose to pass, not playing any more cards that they have in their hand. And during the combat phase, you're going to be going down each of these lanes, activating any of the cards that you have in play within those lanes, and then they're going to be simultaneously attacking them. So you're going to be comparing their attack and defense values, considering any abilities or modifiers, and then issuing out the damage. And of course, if you take more damage than the health points you have available, then that card is going to be removed from the board and added to their discard pile. And of course, to win, you have to bring down your opponent's hero's health down to 0. And like I said, as you're playing cards out onto the main board, you're going to be discarding cards in order to do that. This of course means that your available pool of cards is going to be gradually getting smaller and smaller. And if you run out of enough cards that you're not able to replenish your hand before you defeat your opponent, then you automatically lose the game. So if this one sounds interesting to you, you can check out the Kickstarter page linked down below, and of course you can click to get notified. Also launching on the 14th, we have Dice Cards, and this is a really interesting game, not only for the fact that it plays an infinite number of players in only about 15 to 30 minutes, but also that it's just a really interesting take on the roll and write genre, because every time you play this game, it's going to be completely different than the last, because this is a roll and write that uses cards in order to set up the different mini games and objectives that players will be trying to complete on each of their turns. And the way that this works is at the start of each game, each player is going to be drawing 6 different cards from a deck of 50 unique cards. This means that every player is going to have a completely different set of objectives that they're trying to achieve, but they all work off the same set of dice. So every round 2 dice are going to be rolled, and then you're going to be able to choose either one value or the other, or combine them in different ways in order to create a third value that you might be able to use. And of course, your total victory points are going to be the sum of the victory points from each of your 6 cards. So you're going to be wanting to apply whatever dice roll that you got to the card that it's going to have the biggest impact. And each of these individual cards will also have instructions printed on them telling you how to use those cards. And I pretty much explained the entire rule set to you there in just a couple minutes. You can see how easy this one will be to pick up and play. And players are going to be playing over a set number of rounds. And then the player with the most cumulative victory points at the end of the game is going to win the game. And of course, if you are interested in this one, you can go ahead and check it out. I'll have links in the description below. And also launching on the 14th, we have a campaign that's going to be launching 2 different games. And the first one is called Point City, and you can probably tell by the artwork that this is a little bit of a sequel to the game Point Salad. And both of these games do actually come from the same designers of that game, but those designers also created games like Calico as well as Cascadia, which are all excellent games. And Point City is going to be all about collecting different cards and sets of cards in order to create different buildings for victory points, where Deep Dive is going to be a bit of a push your luck game as you are diving deeper into the ocean and trying to collect different sets of sea creatures. And the way that Point City works is that you'll have a deck of double-sided cards. One side of the card is going to have one of 5 different types of resources, and then the other side of the card is going to have some type of building. You're going to be randomly dealing these cards out into a 4x4 grid, and after that grid of cards is all set up, players are going to be taking turns performing a set of actions on their turn. And the first action you can perform is an optional one, but if there is a full column or a full row that is entirely resource cards, then you're allowed to flip one of those over, revealing the building on the opposite side. And this is just a rule that's in place to ensure that there's always a building available on your turn. But before you go ahead and take a building card, you're gonna have to make sure that you're able to build it, because when you take a card, you build it immediately. So that means you cannot take a building unless you have the required resources that you need to build it, and that will be printed on the card. And there's a whole bunch of different building cards in this game, but some of them do have some resource icons located in the top left corner of the card. And what that means is that once you've built that building, on all of your subsequent turns, you can use that icon once per turn in order to cover the cost of one of the matching icons on any buildings that you are able to build. Of course, the buildings can also have a number of victory points that they're worth at the end of the game, or they might have the civic icon. And whenever you build a building that has the civic icon, that's going to allow you to take one of the civic tokens. And these tokens work all the same. They're going to have some sort of set collection or score an objective for you to try and achieve. You're going to be scoring a certain number of victory points each time that you're able to fulfill that condition. But when it comes to actually taking a card from the tableau, on your turn, you're just allowed to take 2 cards, and they have to be orthogonally adjacent. This means that you can't just pick and choose whichever cards that you want. You're going to have to try and see which pair of cards you think is the most beneficial to you, and then you'll be able to take those 2 cards as long as they are adjacent to each other. And any cards that were taken are going to be replaced by new cards from the main deck. But one thing to note here is that any resource cards are going to be replaced with building cards, and any building cards that were taken are going to be replaced with resource cards. And once the resource deck has been completely depleted, that's going to trigger the end of the game. And then the player with the most victory points from their different buildings, as well as the different civic objectives that they're able to fulfill, will win the game. And now for Deep Dive, which is a 1 to 6 player game that takes about 15 to 20 minutes to play. And this is a set collection and push your luck game that uses a whole bunch of different tiles. Then each player is going to have 3 different penguins. And these tiles come in 5 different shades of blue, with each of them representing a different depth. And you're going to be grouping these tiles together by their shade. And players are going to be taking turns placing one of their 3 penguin meeples out on one of these tiles. Whenever you do that, you always have to start in the shallowest area first, which means that you're going to be going to the lightest shade of blue. Then you'll be able to choose any of those tiles, flip them over, and then resolve whatever effect that tile has. If you flipped a tile that just has bubbles on it, that's going to force you to go into the next deeper depth, where you'll be able to choose a new tile there. If you land on a rock tile, you can choose to bring your penguin back up to the surface, bringing that rock tile and the penguin back into your supply, and that rock can be discarded on a future turn to add one of your penguins to any tile at any depth. But of course, the whole point here is to gain victory points, and the tiles that you're really hoping to find are the different prey tiles, because these are food for your penguin. And there's a whole bunch of different prey tiles available, and they'll all grant you different amounts of victory points, but then collecting sets of those tiles can also grant you bonus victory points. And when you land on one of those, you have the same option as you do with the rock. You can choose to go back up to the surface, bringing that prey back into your supply, and then scoring those victory points at the end of the game. Taking these tiles back up to the surface is a choice. You don't always have to do it. You can just choose to leave your penguin on that tile, which will allow you to move it into deeper depths on a future turn. But there is one more tile that you should be aware of, and maybe it's more accurate to say beware of, because this is the predator tile. And whenever your penguin flips over a predator tile, that predator is going to capture you, and it's going to keep you locked on that tile, and that's going to immediately end your turn. Don't worry, your penguins are super quick, and that predator is not actually going to capture and eat your penguin, but it is going to keep it preoccupied. But the nice thing about having a penguin stuck at one of the depths is that you can only ever have one penguin at each depth. So if you happen to move into a depth that already has one of your penguins, you're just going to be skipping over to the next step, allowing you to go a little bit deeper, a little bit more efficiently in future turns. But it is possible for all of your penguins to get stuck on a predator tile, and if that happens, all your penguins simultaneously make their escape, and you'll also be able to choose one tile across any of those depths to take as your own, as long as it was already previously revealed. And since players aren't always required to take the tile that they land on, there are going to be times where there's revealed tiles out at the different depths. And whenever you go into a new depth, you do have to land on an unrevealed tile and reveal it. But then you have the option to take any revealed tile at that depth. So as more and more are revealed, there's going to be more options for you moving forward. But once all the tiles have been fully explored, that's going to trigger the end of the game. And then players are going to be adding up their score from all the different prey tiles that they're able to acquire. And the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. And if you're interested in either of these games, I have links to the campaign in the description below. Also launching on March 14th, we have Sidney's Quest, and this plays 3 to 5 players and takes about 75 to 120 minutes to play. And this is a Euro game where players are trying to get the most victory points in order to be crowned the next village elder. And each round, players are going to be deciding how they want to spend their effort in order to get them into the best position as the next village elder. Players will be managing and distributing their effort by using these effort cubes, and each player is going to have a cube matching their player color, and then you're going to be able to put those effort cubes into different areas out on the main board, or on your personal player board, or on these different job cards in order to put effort into completing those different items. Putting effort cubes onto the different job cards that you're able to acquire are going to allow you to complete those jobs in order to earn an income, and you can choose to put any amount of cubes onto those job cards and you'll still complete them. You'll just gain more money for filling in more of those cubes. The catch here is that if you do have a job card and you don't put any cubes onto it on your following turn, then you're going to be losing that job card and it's going to go incompleted. But the nice thing about jobs is they are categorized into different icons, and as you complete more jobs with those icons, you become more efficient at that type of job. This means that you'll be able to gain the upgraded version of those cards, gaining you even more income for the same number of cubes. Players are also going to have expenses that they're going to need to pay each and every round, and you can help to keep those expenses down by putting effort cubes on your own personal player board. And you can always choose not to do that, but for any of these spaces that go unfilled, it's going to be increasing your expenses for each and every following round. And yes, you can go into debt in this game, so you'll want to keep that under control. But the most exciting place to put your effort cubes is out on the main board, because there's a whole bunch of different locations out in the village where you can contribute your effort, and each of these are going to work a little bit differently, but they also kind of share the same mechanism that is really unique to this game. And the way that this effort placement works is that you'll be able to distribute however many cubes as you want onto the different areas of the board, as long as you're staying within the limits of those individual spaces. But then after all the players have done this, you're going to be moving on to the next phase, resolving the benefits of those effort for cubes that you put out, and these can do different things like move you up in player order, gain you new job cards or challenge cards which can earn you victory points for the end of the game. But then for any of the other locations that have an associated track, you're going to have a choice. You can either choose to move one of those cubes onto the starting location of that track, and this might come at a cost, or instead you can choose to resolve those cubes, and then for each cube resolved, it's going to push one of your tokens up that track. And this is a good thing because as you move up these tracks, you're going to be gaining different benefits, but then you're also going to get a larger benefit for reaching the end of the track, and then you're also going to get your cube back, which you can then spend to do more actions. The different benefits you can get on these tracks could reduce your expenses or increase your income, as well as just gain you coins that you could spend on cards throughout the game, or they could just gain you victory points. After all the players have resolved their cubes, taking back any that were spent and leaving any that are still out on tracks, then players are going to have to pay their expenses as outlined on their own personal player board. Then the rounds continue like this until the end of the game. Then the player with the most victory points wins the game, and if you're interested in this one or want to learn more, I have links in the description below. And launching on March 14th, we have Transperceneige, and this plays 3 to 5 players and takes about 120 minutes to play. And this is a asymmetrical semi-cooperative board game based on the French comic book with the same name. In this comic book, the Earth has been plunged into a new ice age, and the only surviving humans are trapped on a train that's continually running around the planet forever, but also keeping them alive. In this game, each player is going to be controlling one of 3 social classes of passengers on the train, each corresponding with their own specific social hierarchy and a function on the train. Players are going to have to take ownership of their different areas and cooperate in order to survive to the end of the game, but then they're also going to want to be achieving their own personal objectives in order to gain the most victory points and influence, which means that there might be different revolts and conflicts between the different social classes and between the different players. The game's played over several rounds, with an event card being drawn at the beginning of each round, which can be beneficial or detrimental, affecting the player's resources, passengers, or the train itself. But then players will be choosing a set of action cards from their own unique action deck, using those cards to do things like move passengers around on the train, repair different areas of the train, or even attack the other players. But players can also negotiate during the action phase, trading different items and services in order to try and get the other players to do what they want. Each of the action cards that players play will also have an initiative value associated with them, and then they're going to be revealed and resolved in initiative order. Depending on the current speed of the train, players are going to have to draw up a certain number of railroad cards, and that's going to determine the direction and the distance that the train travels, as well as any effects that might pop up. This means that there might be some new surprises that players have to deal with on their future turns, but then the final phase is the rest phase, where any of your working passengers must be fed, but then any of the passengers that weren't put to work are able to repopulate, which can then add more workers into your pool. All the players lose the game if the event card runs out. Player loses all of their passengers, or the train does not go in the right direction, reaching the death marker on the board instead of its final destination. But if the train does reach its final destination, then the ice age comes to an end and all the players survive, but the player with the most influence points at the end is the only winner. And if you're interested in this IP, or if you'd like to learn more, I have links down below. Also launching on March 14th, we have Old Mage, and this plays 2 to 6 players and takes about 1 to 2 hours to play. And this is a competitive game where each player is a mage that's trying to win the game by accomplishing one of 2 things. You can either be the last mage standing, or you can be the one to acquire an ancient relic and then return it to a tower at the opposite end of the board from where you started. Each player is going to be choosing their mage at the start of the game, coming with their own unique special ability, as well as a number of health points. Players will also be able to level up their character throughout the game by fighting monsters and finding stronger spell cards that they'll be able to cast. And on a player's turn, you're going to have a few different actions they can perform. You can either choose to stay at your current location and gain 2 health, or instead you can move into a new location. After you've done that, you can optionally cast one of your spells, activating whatever effects that it might have, and then you're going to have one encounter, and this is going to be either with another player that you're sharing a space with, or it will be with a monster, and the type of monster that you'll encounter depends on the type of tile that you're on. And in order to resolve a battle, players and monsters will be alternating back and forth rolling dice, adding whatever buffs they have from different spells, inflicting damage on their opponent. This is going to go back and forth until there's only one survivor. And if a player ever loses their health, they're not immediately removed from the game, but they instead turn into a ghost. And your turn changes a little bit when you're a ghost, because at the start of your turn, all you can do is move, and in order to do that, you're going to be rolling 2 dice, and then you're going to be able to move however many movement points the dice dictate. Then you're going to be drawing and casting whichever spell that let you draw. But if you do happen to roll doubles on your movement phase, this will actually reincarnate you into an undead mage, putting you back into the game with only 5 health. But your body can only handle so much death, so if you do die a second time while you're in your undead state, then you are permanently eliminated from the game. The game continues like this until either of those endgame conditions are met, and then the player that is either the last player standing or the one to have gotten that ancient relic to the tower is going to win the game. And you can find out more in the description below. And launching on March 14th, we have the second edition as well as 2 brand new expansions to the game Townsfolk Tussle, which plays 2 to 5 players and takes about 40 to 200 minutes to play. And this is a game that launched a couple years ago, and since it's been released to backers, it's been getting a lot of positive attention as well as a lot of positive reviews. So it's no surprise that this one is our Discord pick of the week. And also, after looking into this one myself, this one is also my own personal pick of the week. And I assure you, I am not easily swayed by the hype. I just honestly think that this game looks like a really fun design. It looks like a game that I would personally love to own. And if you're not familiar with this game, this is a cooperative boss battler where players are characters from a town where the sheriff's been killed, and now your town is being attacked by 4 different ruffians. The game features that rubber hose artwork that's reminiscent of those classic old-timey cartoons. Players are going to be drawing 4 random bosses at the start of the game, and you're going to be fighting these over the entirety of the game. But each one you fight is going to be stronger than the last because of a really neat mechanism that is incorporated into this game. And the way that this works is that each of the bosses actually has 4 different forms, and depending on the order that they come out, you're going to be using whichever form is associated with that point in the game. So this means that the first boss you're going to be fighting is going to be in its weakest state, which is the chump phase, and then the final boss you're going to be fighting will be at the final fight phase, which is going to have some special abilities and little changes about them that's going to make them much more tougher. Players, of course, are also going to have their own asymmetrical characters with different special abilities and stats, and you're going to have both your starting stat as well as a maximum stat that you might be able to modify throughout the game. Players will also start with some starting gear that could help them perform some special abilities or manipulate their stats in different ways, and players will also start with some starting income, which will allow them to buy more gear. And of course, the game plays over 4 rounds, with each round being dedicated to one of the 4 bosses, and each of the rounds is also broken into 2 phases. There's the town phase, and then there is the fight phase. During the town phase, players are going to be drawing up to a hand of 3 feat cards, and the feat cards are just going to be different objectives that players are going to be trying to complete over the course of the round. And if you're able to complete that objective, that's going to gain you some points as well as some income that you could use for the following round, or instead of income, it could also gain you upgrades in your different stats. Players also draw an event card which can have some game-changing effects, but these event cards can also be secret effects that can grant you a special ability or reaction to an event that might happen in the game later. And after those cards have been drawn, players are just going to be taking turns spending their money and buying new gear cards from the shared market, while optionally selling any of the gear cards that they might have already. And that's all there is for the town phase. Not a super complicated game, but it's also one of the reasons why I'm so interested in this one, because the special abilities between all the different characters and the different ways you can manipulate those in conjunction with your different gear cards, as well as the excitement of the different event cards, I think will add a ton of fun. And offering all of this with a low barrier to entry is something that's really exciting. But of course, all this excitement is going to be realized during the fight phase, where players will be revealing the next boss, taking that boss deck as well as their boss board, which is going to dictate their health and movement, any special abilities depending on the order it was revealed, as well as a weakness and any cards that will be provided in the reward deck if that boss is defeated. The boss board also contains instructions to help players set up the board for the boss fight, which could include adding different creatures onto the board as well as different terrain. And even the terrain adds something interesting to the game because it's not there just to look good. Each piece of terrain will have different effects that could get in the player's way or also be taken advantage of. And then the boss fight plays out with alternating turns between the players and the boss, where you're going to be drawing a random card from the boss's deck in order to determine what type of movement or attacks it might make. And players will be able to perform a number of actions that's dictated by their stats, and they'll be able to do different things like move around the board, activate their abilities, switch out their gear, or attack with different weapons. Each weapon can only be used once per turn, but they can all have different range stats as well as different requirements in order to use that weapon, but each of them will also have an accuracy stat, and in order to have a successful hit, you're going to have to roll a die and then combine that with your character's accuracy, with the result being higher than the accuracy requirement for that weapon. The players win the round if they're able to get that boss's health down to 0, and then they're going to be rewarded for any of their feat cards that they were able to complete, while also having the opportunity to discard any feat cards that they want in order to draw new ones for the following round. But the player that was able to complete the most feats is going to be the one that's able to loot the boss's corpse. And the way that works is that you take all the reward cards that are outlined on that boss's boss card, then you're going to be shuffling those up and then just taking one randomly. And the game continues like this, with the players going through a town phase and then into a fight phase for each of the bosses, and if they're able to defeat that final boss, then the players win the game. As I mentioned, this new campaign will be offering a 2nd edition version of the game, as well as an upgrade pack for anyone that does already own the original version, and this is going to be including a shorter 3 ruffian version of the game, as well as changes to the way that money's earned, so that players are earning a static amount for winning a fight, but then gaining additional money for completing their various feats. It also makes some other minor changes to the rulebook, both for clarity as well as to address various concerns and feedback from players. For example, speeding up both the teardown and setup of the various boss battles. The Foul Neighbors expansion is just going to be adding more content into the game, with 8 new ruffians as well as 2 new townsfolk for players to play as. And then the Odd Jobs expansion is actually going to be adding some brand new mechanisms to the game, and in order to do this, you're actually going to be replacing your entire gear deck with a brand new one that's going to include roll tags on each of the different types of gear, and it will probably also include some new types of gear as well. And the way that this works is that these new gear cards are going to have different tags on them, and if any player is able to get 3 matching tags across their gear cards, it's going to make them an expert in that role. And this is going to allow that player to take that specific role card, which is going to grant that player with additional abilities and stats in addition to their character's existing abilities. But this expansion will also introduce broken gear and unlockable gear that players will have to meet different requirements in order to repair or discover, and that will actually be adding new gear cards into your deck that will be creating a bit of a story when they show up in a following game. And the final mechanism that the Odd Jobs expansion is going to be adding into the game is the concept of deployable terrain, where this will allow players to deploy terrain into that final boss fight, so they're not just subject to the setup for that boss, and instead adding a bit of control as well as a little bit of variability, since deploying this terrain will essentially change that final boss fight. And I'm way more excited for this one to launch this time around than during the original campaign. I did know about this campaign when it launched originally, but there was a lot of just miniatures games being launched on Kickstarter at the time. I guess there still is, and I just didn't end up looking into it. But one of the nice things about making these videos every single week is that I am now forced to look into these. And if this was the case the first time this campaign launched, I probably would have backed it, because I will be backing it this time. And if you are also interested, I do have links down in the description below, and of course you can click to get notified. And also launching on the 14th, we have the Tales from Moni, the Dungeons of Whatever. And this is a game that I couldn't find on Board Game Geek, so I searched the rest of the internet and found some information over on Reddit. But essentially this is a cooperative booklet dungeon where players are going to be controlling a 3-character party of heroes. Players are going to be trying to grab as much treasure as possible in the various rooms as they encounter different monsters, golds, treasure chests, and other items that they can interact with. And players might have to roll dice to determine what spawns in the dungeon or to determine different outcomes, which is going to add some variability to the game. But each room is going to have 3 different actions that the players have to tackle in order to get treasure and move on to the next room. And the strategy here lies with matching your available actions with your different characters. And you're going to be rolling a d6 die in order to resolve those different actions, but it's also going to be modified by the results that was previously rolled by the other characters. This is going to add a little bit of teamwork to the game, where players will also have to decide which order that they want to resolve their actions. Monsters will always drop gold, but the chests will always drop items, which can help players in various ways. But if you do fail on opening up a chest, all is not lost, because you can still have access to all the gold, which is the main objective in the game. And this game is intended for a younger audience, so if you do have some kids that kids that are naturally developing into seasoned board gamers, this is definitely something that you'll want to check out. And also launching on the 14th, we have Watch Baseball, Get Drunk. And this is a card game that is nicely summarized with this bit of text here that describes it as a drinking game you play while watching a live baseball game. And this is exactly as it sounds. Players are going to be using their cards, making different bets, or reacting to different events that will cause them to drink if those events happen in the actual game. And this is a follow-up sort of sequel to their previous game, which was called Watch Hockey, Get Drunk. And this one will play very similar to that one, and the previous one will also be offered in this campaign, so I'll go ahead and roll that footage for you now. And the way this game works is that at the start of the game, you're going to be shuffling up the deck and dealing cards to each player, and then each of the cards is going to have some sort of moment that if that ever happens in the hockey game, you can hand that to another player and issue them a drink. But there's also going to be some cards in the middle of the table, and these are going to be global cards that if any of those events happen, then all players have to drink. But then for those pesky commercials or pauses in the game, this game does offer intermission cards, and these are going to offer either mini games or trivia that players can try to attempt. And of course, this will probably result in more drinking. And the game continues like this until the hockey game is over, until you're too drunk to continue, and all players win the game. Also launching on the 14th, we have Duck Duck Mousse, and this is a quick party game for 3 to 5 players. It takes about 5 to 15 minutes to play, but this is also a game that has 3 different types of rule set, allowing players to play 3 different types of games with the same set of cards. And the normal rule set has the deck divvied up amongst the players, and then players are going to be throwing down a card at a time until a moose appears. And no, I'm not talking about the animal, I'm actually talking about hair moose, because each of your ducks is going to have a bit of a bad hair day, and you're trying to get them all in order. And as soon as a moose appears on the table, the first player that's able to slap it is going to be able to take that into their hand, and then apply it to one of their ducks, fixing their duck's bad hair day. And the first player to moose all their ducks is going to win the game, but I did say this could be played in a few different ways, and an alternate way to play the game is that rather than going for the moose, players are going to be going for all the non-duck animal cards and then trying to search for a set of 3. The first player that gets 3 sets of 3 with this rule set wins the game. And then the final way to play the game is to just mix all the different animals, all the ducks and the moose into a single deck, split it between all the players, and then players are just going to be rapidly putting the cards down as fast as possible, trying to be the first to gain 5 duck cards as well as 5 moose cards. And if this one sounds interesting to you, I have links down below. And launching on the 15th, we have The Hunt, and this plays 2 players and takes about 25 to 45 minutes to play. And if you are a fan of abstract strategies, especially those that have a little bit of hidden movement, I think this is definitely one that you'll want to check out, because this one looks like a really solidly designed game. But in this game, players are going to be playing either as the German or the British, and you're going to be going head to head in an asymmetric battle. The Germans are going to have 2 fighter ships, 1 non-aggressive fighter ship that's going to be always visible out on the board, but then you're going to have 1 aggressive ship that's always going to be moving in secret. And the goal of the Germans to win the game is to sink 5 merchant ships. The British, on the other hand, have 3 different fighter ships, each of varying strength, but you're only going to be starting out with 1 on the main board, and you're going to have to spend action points in order to bring your additional ships out onto the board as well. There's 2 ways that the British can win the game. They can either successfully get 5 merchant ships over to their destination, or they can hunt down and destroy the Germans' main ship in a final battle. And the main board is not too complicated. It's just an open ocean broken into different spaces. But then there's going to be 4 different piers where merchant ships can appear and then try to make their way to another destination. There's always going to be 2 merchant ships out on the board at any given time, and each of the merchant ships will indicate which pier they start at and which pier they are moving to. Each player is going to be alternating taking turns, and the turns work very similarly with a few small changes. One of the changes is that if you are the British, you're going to be able to move each of the merchant ships 1 space at the start of your turn, and then you're going to be playing your cards from your hand like you would if you were the German player. All the cards in this game are dual use, and they can either be used for their ability, or instead they can be spent for their action point value. And this is going to allow you to do some other different actions, and in the case of the British, this is going to allow you to make extra movements with your various ships, or you can spend some of those action points to search your current location for the Germans' main ship, and whenever you do that, you're going to be rolling a die, trying to roll either a 5 or a 6 in order to successfully search that space, and then if the German ship is there, it's going to trigger the final battle. If you're playing as a German player, your turn is going to go very similar to that, but there's no no moving ships for free at the start of your turn. Instead, you're just going to be playing cards from your hand, either for their special ability or for their action point value, but the actions available for action points are a little bit different with the Germans. You can either move one of your ships up to 3 spaces, attack any ship in the same space as your main hidden ship, and whenever you do that, you're also going to be rolling a die trying to get a 5 or a 6. But you can also choose to use your search plane, which will add a 2 pip value to whatever roll you make at the cost of damaging your plane. Luckily, you can spend action points to fix your plane as well, or instead you can add them to your reserve to be used on a following turn, but you can only store a maximum of 2 action points. And as I said, your main ship is hidden most of the time, but anytime that it does attack another ship, it's going to be temporarily revealed. Then it's going to go back into hiding as soon as you make your next movement. And I did mention that there was a secondary ship that's also going to be out on the board, and this one's always available, always visible, and is not ever going to get into any battles. And the point of that ship is that it will give some different benefits to your main secret ship if they are adjacent to each other. And the German player is always going to be tracking where their main secret ship is on a separate piece of paper, logging which space it's currently residing, and then updating that anytime that it moves. And one of the benefits of ending your turn with your 2 ships side by side is that you'll be able to draw up to a hand of 5 cards if they're adjacent, but if they aren't, then you can only draw up to a maximum of 3. Of course, you could still choose to just draw up to a maximum of 3 even if they are adjacent, just to throw your opponent off. The British, on the other hand, have nothing to hide, and they always draw up to a hand of 5. And if and when that final battle is triggered, players are each going to be drawing up to a full hand of 5 cards, and then players are going to be simultaneously revealing 1 card at a time, comparing the action point value of those cards to determine which player is the one to inflict damage on the other. This might sound a little random at first, but it's not really that random at all, because players will start to anticipate when they think that final fight might be happening, and then that will indicate to them that they probably want to start saving their high AP cards to be the best equipped for that final battle. Of course, your high AP cards are also the most valuable to spend for their action points, so there is a little bit of push your luck of when you want to keep those rather than playing them, but you really don't want to be caught with your low level cards in the heat of battle. And of course, the player that gets inflicted with the most damage loses that battle and therefore loses the game, but there is going to be a slight advantage to the British player because I did mention they have 3 ships, and those ships can have an additional bonus value on them that's going to get added to those cards. So if you're able to get your strongest ships into that battle, then that's going to get you the best advantage. Really interesting game here, and I'm really impressed with the design, and if this one looks interesting to you, I recommend checking it out, and you can find links in the description below. Also launching on the 15th, we have Beverage, and this plays 3 to 5 players and takes about 60 to 90 minutes to play, and this is a competitive game where players are CEOs of a beverage company that are in partnership with a stadium that's currently under construction. And players are competing to be recognized as the most prestigious company because only the company with the highest reputation is going to be allowed to sell their drinks inside the stadium. The game plays over a series of rounds, with each round starting with a blind bidding phase where players are going to be bidding for how much they want to set their prices for their drinks, but the market will dictate how much actually gets sold, and based on those prices and the market demand, players are going to have to manufacture and deliver that amount. This is the primary way that players get income in the game, but then this money is going to be used to pay for actions around the board in order to operate their company, fund different activities and marketing in order to raise their company's awareness, and also pay dividends to their shareholders. But of course, the bigger you get, the more the government is going to try and take, and players are going to be having to pay tax at the end of each round, with that increasing with each bit of progression they make with their company. And the stadium is going to be continually built up as players are performing their various actions, and then once the stadium is complete, the game is going to end, and then the player with the most victory points at that time wins the game. I didn't have a whole lot of info on how this one played, but I tried to give the best run through that I could. But if you are interested in this one and you want to find out more about how the game plays, definitely check out their campaign because I'm sure there'll be a lot more info there. Also launching on the 15th, we have Vedur, and this plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 10 minutes per player to play with the basic rule set, and then 20 minutes per player for the more advanced rule set. And in this game, players are playing as different seers of the village, exploring the different areas of the village and visiting the townsfolk, as well as different spiritual realms, in order to use all this information to make prophecies about the future weather patterns. During a player's turn, they're going to be choosing one of the basic actions on their player board by putting their token onto that action and then taking that action. And these different actions can allow you to do different things like draw more cards into your hand, or lay down and match the weather cards with the various weather tiles. And in order to do this, you're going to be matching icons between the cards and the tiles, and then sliding your card underneath that tile. You'll then be putting one of your colored cubes beside that icon on the tile to show that you are the one that fulfilled it, and then the tile is going to be completed as soon as all 4 spaces are filled. And there is also an action that allows you to do a combination of drawing cards as well as playing them. The players that contributed to those tiles will be gaining points once those tiles are completed, but players can never play the same action twice in a row because on your following turn you're going to have to move your action token to one of the other action spaces. And the player with the most points at the end of the game wins the game, and of course if you want to know more, I have links in the description below. Also launching on the 15th, we have Maladum, Dungeons of Enveron, and this plays 1 to 6 players and takes about 45 to 120 minutes to play. And this is a fantasy dungeon crawler that appears medieval, but actually takes place in the distant future. This game takes place over a series of narrative quests that are going to outline how the players will be setting up the board, any special rules, as well as the objectives that they're trying to complete. Players will be able to upgrade their adventurers' abilities and equipment on their own personal player boards, and each quest will have players venturing out from the safety of their camp, trying to complete those various objectives, but then also getting back to their camp in one piece. And this is easier said than done because there is a dread track that's going to be continually increasing the longer that you stay out on the main board in this beautiful 3D terrain. Each round, players are going to be drawing a random event card that can have all sorts of game-changing effects. Then players will be taking their actions with their various adventures. The different characters can have different stats, and normally they have 2 actions per turn, and players will be doing things like moving about the board, searching different areas of the board like loot chests or different rooms. And these chests do make full use of the 3D terrain because you're actually going to be able to find your items within the chests that you're searching. But if you're searching a room, you're just going to be drawing an item from a draw bag. But the really interesting thing here is that new items will get added to that draw bag throughout the campaign, depending on the actions that the players perform. So this will add more and more rarer and stronger items into that bag that players will be able to hope to draw in a future turn. Players can also choose to rest, cast spells, or attack creatures that are within their range. And players will be rolling various dice for most of these actions, trying to pass a skill test in order to determine the success of those actions. But of course, players will also be able to use certain spells and items in order to manipulate the outcome of their dice. But the monsters don't just stand idly by, and depending on the actions that you perform, the monsters will fight back, and you could even have more monsters spawning depending on the areas that you move into as you're performing your turn, because certain areas are more likely to spawn enemies than others, and whenever you come into contact with that space, you're going to be rolling a die to determine if something spawns there. And I hope you like challenging games because things won't get any easier, because in addition to all of that, the monsters also get their own turn as well, where they're going to be rolling dice to determine new spawns out on the board. Then they're going to be moving towards the nearest enemy, prioritizing those that are in line of sight. And of course, they're also going to be attacking anyone that they're able to, triggering more and more fights. And if the players are able to survive those fights, while also completing the objectives that they're trying to complete, before things get too crazy and difficult, then the players win the game. But as I said, as that dread track goes up, the game gets harder and harder, making all the different monsters even stronger, so you really want to time yourself with this. And if that's something that's interesting to you, I have links in the description below. And launching on the 18th, we have Star Colonies, and this plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 30 to 120 minutes to play. And this is a deck building game that I thought was launching a couple weeks back, but it got pushed back until now. So I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And the way this game works is that each player is going to be starting the game with a starter deck with a few different types of ships, and players are competing to be the first to get to 4 victory points. But instead of gaining victory points for combat and fighting the other players, instead you're going to be gaining victory points for each outpost that you're able to build, and 2 victory points for each outpost that you're able to upgrade into a colony. And in typical deck builder fashion, you're going to be drawing a few cards from your draw pile and then using them and then adding them to your discard pile. And any new cards that you buy will also go directly into your discard pile. And as I mentioned, there's a few different types of ships in this game, and the first one is the scout ship. And you're going to be playing these from your hand in order to explore the exploration deck. So for each scout card that you play, you're going to be able to draw a card from that exploration deck. There can be a few different cards in this deck, but what you're looking for are different locations, because some of these locations can be colonized, but in order to do that, you're gonna have to meet some sort of requirement outlined on that card. But when you find this card, you can put your player marker on it to indicate that you have scouted that planet. And when you do finally meet the requirement, you're not only going to be gaining the victory points for that outpost or colony, but you can also gain additional benefits like additional resources or special abilities. And then there are the transport ships that you're going to be sending out to gain resources and money, which you can then use to gain more cards. And one thing to note about this game is that when you do reuse your discard pile, you're not actually going to be shuffling it up. The order of your cards does matter because that's going to stay intact when it goes to become your draw deck. So as you're discarding cards or buying new cards, you're going to want to think about the order that those are going into your discard pile. And another really important ship to know about is the warship, because as players are trying to build out colonies on these different locations, if you're not protected, the other players might want to swoop in and take that planet for themselves. And this is where the warships come into play, because depending on which side you're on, you're either going to be using these ships to initiate an attack or to defend against one. And if you are in an attack, you can always deploy more of these warships in order to reinforce your side. And then at the end of your turn, you're going to be drawing back up to your hand limit, and then the game continues like this until someone reaches that threshold of victory points, and then that player is going to win the game. And if this one does sound interesting to you, you can find a link to the campaign in the description below, and you'll want to follow along so that you get that limited edition card added to your pledge completely for free. And those are all the campaigns this week, but don't leave yet because we still have an awesome giveaway to announce, and this one is for Reviving Kathmandu. And this is a bidding and bluffing game where players are going to be bidding on dual use cards, each representing a certain part of a building. You're going to be trying to stack those together to create different combinations to earn victory points. But in a really interesting way that the bluffing works in this game is that each player has a limited number of tokens, and they're going to be placing them either on a row or a column out on the main board. Players will then be flipping all of the tokens, and then the player that has the highest bid value in any of those intersection points is going to be taking those cards. This means that you could win up to 2 cards depending on the bids and the way that they intersect, but for any cards that you were not able to win, you're going to be drawing randomly from the shared deck, which is still nice, but you're going to want to win those bids because you're going to have a better chance of winning if you're able to pick the cards you want rather than randomly drawing them from the deck. Players will be combining those cards together in order to score victory points based on the buildings that they're able to build. And then after 8 rounds, the player with the most victory points wins the game. And I run the easiest giveaways to enter ever because all you have to do is leave a comment down below and you can say whatever you want and you don't have to leave a hashtag or anything since this one's going to be offered worldwide. And I'll just draw from all the comments and whoever I draw will be winning a copy of Kathmandu. But if you're unsure of what to say and you're looking for a suggestion, maybe you could let us know of what building that you would love to visit if you could visit any building on the face of this earth. And for myself, I think it's pretty obvious. I'd love to visit the Dice Tower. And don't tell me it's not a real place. Good luck in the giveaways, but now let's go ahead and draw the winners for last week's giveaways. And we had a couple real exciting ones here, with the first one being Scholars of the South Tigris. And to draw a winner, I just used this application here that randomly draws a winner from the previous video's comments. And all these extra names down here is just a way that I like to show my appreciation to those of you that do follow along on the Patreon. Everyone is welcome to enter these giveaways, but anyone that joins the Patreon will be getting a few extra entries added to each of these giveaways. And if you do enjoy these videos and appreciate the effort and commitment I put into them every single week, I really do appreciate any support that you're able to put towards the channel, and I do have a Patreon linked in the description below. But let's get to the good stuff and draw those comments and draw the winner. And the winner of South Tigris is GS24, and this is one of our Patreon subscribers, so I'll reach out to you and let you know that you won yourself a pledge for Scholars of the South Tigris. Super excited for you, and I hope it brings a ton of fun to the table. And the next giveaway was for one that, spoiler alert, I am a backer of currently. I am going to try and play this one before I fully commit, but it does look like a game that's a ton of fun. And this one is Ancient Terrible Things Reawakened, and a draw winner here. I'm going to be doing the exact same thing. So let's go ahead and draw those comments and draw the winner. And the winner of Ancient Terrible Things is Steph Korchak, and this is also one of our Patreon subscribers, so congratulations, Steph. I'll reach out to you and let you know that Ancient Terrible Things are coming your way. My jokes are getting worse. It's late. That's everything for this week. I hope this video was helpful for you to find new games that you think might be right for you, if any at all. And as always, I do appreciate you checking the video, and that's enough for me. But if you want to stay up to date with the content and you want to have these videos show up in your newsfeed, you can always subscribe and like down below. And you can also click that bell icon if you want to get even more notifications about these going up. I only post one video every single week, so you're not going to get spammed, but I only suggest clicking that bell icon if you do want to get notified as soon as these go up, because if you don't, it's probably just going to annoy you more than I intend to. But either way, the one thing that I do ask, or more accurately require, is that you keep that shelf cluttered and the table full. Have a good night.